Good afternoon. I'm pleased to welcome you to a co-sponsored event by the Schwab Center for Israel and Jewish Studies and the Islamic Studies program at the University of Nebraska-Omaha. I'm Jeanette Gabriel. I'm the director of the Schwab Center for Israel and Jewish Studies. And this is our second annual joint event with the Islamic Studies program. We're very pleased to have this collaboration and excited about our program today. This is part of the ongoing programming of the Schwab Center. To see programs that you might have missed, you can go to our website and look at all those back videos where you can learn also more about the programming and work that the Schwab Center does. And I'd now like to introduce who will be introducing the speaker, Dr. Ramazan Kalenk, who is the Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Islamic Studies program at UNO. He teaches courses on comparative politics and international relations in the Middle East and is the recent author of Alien Citizens, the State and Religious Minorities in Turkey and France. Ramazan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you for your nice words, and thanks also inviting UNO Islamic Studies program to co-sponsor this great talk. Before introducing Dr. Baer, I would like to use the opportunity also to publicize an upcoming event that UNO Islamic Studies program is organizing next month. On March 11th at noon, Evelyn El-Sultani of University of South California will speak about how Muslims' media representations change after Trump's Muslim ban. El-Sultani is indeed a scholar, or the scholar, to speak on this topic, and we would like to see many of you in that lecture as well. I will share the link to the event in the chat later. Today, we are lucky to have Professor Marc David Baer for a joint event with Islamic Studies and Schwab Center. I think Dr. Baer is a wonderful choice as he works on both Judaic and Islamic studies. I'm especially excited because as a scholar of Turkey focusing on religious minorities, I've benefited a lot from Professor Baer's work. So Professor Baer was born in Columbia, South Carolina, but has spent much of his life outside the United States. He has lived in South Korea, Germany, and Turkey, and now he is settled in the United Kingdom. He earned his PhD in history at the University of Chicago, and he is a professor of international history at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He is a prolific scholar and the author of many books. His first book, honored by the Glory of Islam, Conversion and Conquest in Ottoman Europe, came with Oxford in 2008. In 2010, he published The Dönme, Jewish Converts, Muslim Revolutionaries and Secular Turks, which was actually translated into Turkish and Greek as well. In the past year, Dr. Baer published two new books, Sultanic Savers and Tolerant Turks, Writing Ottoman Jewish History, Denying the Armenian Genocide, and German Jewish Muslim Gay, The Life and Times of Hugo Marcos, which actually he will be speaking about today. His next book, The Ottomans, Khans, Caesars, and Caliphs, which is written for a broader audience interested in Ottoman history, will be released this year in October. Now we will listen to Dr. Baer's pre-recorded presentation, and then he will answer your questions afterwards with Dr. Janet Gabriel's moderation. Thank you.
A novelist, poet, philosopher, political activist, and writer, Hugo Marc is committed to many different circles, movements, and ideologies over the course of his 86 years. His choices speak to a desire to find a utopia or to join universal brotherhoods. After completing gymnasium in Posen in 1898, he migrated to Berlin. And around that time, he joined the first organization in the world to campaign for the rights of homosexuals, the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, founded by his friend Magnus Hirschfeld, who was also of Jewish background. Like many other sons of German Jewish provincial families in Imperial Germany, Marcus then studied philosophy at Berlin's University, where he befriended Kurt Hiller, another leading homosexual rights activist of Jewish background, whose 1922 book, Paragraph 175, The Disgrace of the Century, is a seminal work in the homosexual rights struggle, aimed at winning the liberation of a human minority that, although harmless, is oppressed, persecuted, and tormented. Their academic mentors included Georg Simmel, himself the son of Jewish converts to Christianity, who, although renowned today as one of the founders of sociology, in his day was known as the philosopher of the avant-garde and played a leading role in the left-wing, pacifist, feminist, and homosexual rights movements. Marcus found two pathways to what he conceived of as divinity. He first joined the George Circle, a quasi-religious group composed of the rapturous middle-class youth disciples of the poet and prophet Stefan George, who thought of themselves as avant-gardes waging a cultural and spiritual war of redemption to renew Germany, and whose membership overlapped that of masculinist homosexual circles. He was either introduced to the circle by his well-known historian cousin Ernst Kantorowicz, or he was inspired to do this by Simmel, who was George's close friend. Then, however, Marcus went on to join the Ahmadi movement for the propagation of Islam, an Islamic confessional minority born in British India, becoming the only Jewish convert and member in Berlin. Prior to World War I, Marcus earned some renown with a half a dozen philosophical works. In one of these, Meditations, written while the precocious 20-year-old was still a doctoral student, and whose writing, like that of George, is marked by an elitist, Philhellenic homoeroticism, whose major themes are pederasty, the master-disciple relationship, and a search for a new utopia, we catch a hint of his openness to joining a new spiritual community. Marcus's utopia includes a new lay priest order devoted to the purpose of spreading a uniform worldview and a truthful social doctrine. Marcus did not have the luxury of being able to devote himself to philosophical and poetic pursuits alone. Like other Jewish youths sent to the capital to seek higher education to facilitate their family's social climbing, he was expected to work in the family business. World War I would change that. During the war, Marcus worked with Hiller in the latter's pacifist organization, the Activist League, and served on the staff of his pacifist socialist journal, The Aim, Yearbook for Spiritual Politics. After the war, Marcus's father lost his fortune when Prussian Posen became Polish Poznan. But Marcus considered this a lucky break, freeing him of the unbearable obligation to inherit his family's wood finishing business. It was also as a result of this that he found Islam, presented to him as a universal brotherhood that united men of all nations and races, and that, as he quickly discovered, promotes homosocial bonds. To support his family, he began working as a German tutor to young Muslim men from the Ahmadi mission, a community not unlike the George Circle, in that both consisted of disciples who were devoted to the teachings of a charismatic master, originally seen as a prophet, and who perceived themselves as a select few waging a war to redeem the soul of Germany. He made a strong impression on the mosque community. In 1923, the Ahmadi hired him for life as editor of all of its German language publications. He formed an especially close bond with the chic, handsome bachelor Mevlana Sadr ad-Din, about whom he wrote erotic passages. Inspired by the Imam, Marcus converted to Islam in 1925. It would be mistaken to consider the pre- and post-conversion phases of his life as if they were entirely distinct. He viewed Islam in a Jewish way, as rational and a pure expression of Jewish monotheism, and reflecting the fact that he was gay, promoted the idea that one of the core pillars of Islam is purity, which includes pacifism, love and beauty, brotherhood, and tolerance of exceptional cases like himself. For a dozen years, under the adopted name Hamid, which is Arabic for the praised one, he was the most important German in Berlin's mosque community. As the Ahmadi boasted, the West is destined sooner or later to witness the sunrise of Islam, and we hasten to congratulate Dr. Marcus on his being one of the few chosen ones who are the harbingers of that sunrise. Referring to Marcus as one of the few chosen ones speaks to his Jewish heritage. Nevertheless, he did not end his membership in the Jewish community or cut his ties to Jewish friends and family. Despite his conversion to Islam, Marcus did not end his attachments with friends in the homosexual rights movement or with his younger, blonde-haired Polish Catholic friend, Roman Maliki, a fellow native of Posen, either. The year of Marcus's conversion, he helped craft and signed a petition that was organized by Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science and sent to the Justice Minister urging repeal of paragraph 175 of the Criminal Code, which penalized, in the law's language, unnatural sexual acts between men. Marcus was the leading German Muslim in the Islamic community centered on the first mosque in Germany established by Muslims for Muslims, the Berlin Mosque, completed in 1927 by the Ahmadi. Marcus played a key role in articulating the meaning of Islam for Germans in his capacities as chief editor of the Ahmadi journal Muslim Review, in which he published the most articles by far by any German author, chairman of the German Muslim Society. He was frequent lecturer at the Society's monthly public Islam evenings, attended by his acquaintances from gay rights and literary circles, Thomas Mann and Hermann Hesse, and he was editor of a Quran translation, commentary, and introduction. In his mosque lectures and publications, including his own conversion narrative, Marcus promoted the utopian project of an Islam for Germany, demonstrating the similarities between Muslim and German values and philosophy, especially as represented by Friedrich Nietzsche, and presenting the Muslim views of Muhammad and Islam held by Goethe, expressed in his poems Muhammad's Song and Hymn and West-East Divan, including its notes and essays for a better understanding of the West-East Divan, as well as his incomplete Muhammad tragedy. Marcus took Goethe's work as a precedent for his own, and his views of Islam as a precedent also for his own. After all, Goethe had written or stated, "The truly sublime Quran attracts me, astonishes me, and in the end, elicits my admiration. And I have contemplated devoutly celebrating that holy night when the Quran in its entirety was revealed to the Prophet from on high." The writer of this book, the West-East Divan, does not even reject the supposition that he may be a Muslim. I find it foolish and quite odd that stubborn folk seek to deny. If Islam means we all serve God, we all in Islam live and die. In fact, Goethe's religiosity, despite his saying these things and writing these things, was an extraordinarily complex phenomenon. Despite professions such as these I just quoted, he did not confess to any organized religion. In considering him a secret Muslim, German converts to Islam overlooked the objections the poet raised, ranging from his critique of misogyny as expressed in the Quran and in practices and sayings attributed to Muhammad, to the prohibition of wine and inebriation, and to Muhammad's antagonism towards poets and poetry. German converts to Islam also remained silent about the fact that wine, women, and song, and the celebration of man-boy love are the main themes of the West-East Divan. Irrespective, however, of whether Goethe was a secret Muslim, an issue mainly for German converts to Islam, and of his representations of Islam in the Orient, a concern for literary scholars, the subject considered here is how Marcus used Goethe's reading of Islam to construct a vision of a German utopia. Although scholars have grappled with Goethe's views of Islam, none have explored how members of the first generation of German Muslims engaged with his work. Marcus used Goethe's conversion to make a bold argument about German and Islamic culture. what Marcus envisioned was an Islam rooted in Goethe's Weimar classicism in the Enlightenment era. He saw being German as viewing the world in the Muslim Goethe's terms. For Germans, being Muslim was to read Islam in a Goethean way. Rather than see converts such as Marcus instrumentally as mediators between foreign Muslims and local Christians, between India and Germany, we should see these new Muslims as playing an active role in responding to the crisis in German society. Marcus's astonishing analysis of the crisis reflects the broader debate about the future of German society and historical revisionism that marked Weimar Germany. Facing utter and complete change, Germans debated how to rebuild society. Germans affected by the death and dismantling of their culture and by the loss of religion and morals longed for a way to satisfy their own and society's search for new forms of religiosity and community, meaning and harmony. What could best speak to the general disillusion with received religious creeds and scholarly philosophies and the demand for new formulations, new symbols, new explanations? If the war's end served as a historical rupture, at once the site of the invalidation of the past and the point of departure for the future, then what should that future look like? In Weimar Germany, renovation and crisis went hand in hand, and the era's consciousness of crisis produced a sense of exuberant possibility. Weimar crisis talk offered positive and productive associations, providing Germans with confidence in their own capacity to change, innovate, and even surmount crisis, and a chance for renewal. In this turbulent era, marked by its iconoclasm and syncretism, just as radical artists created the multi-perspectivism of montage, and people with wildly divergent aims deployed the Nietzschean transvaluation of values, intellectuals blended contradictory elements into blueprints for the future. One such paradoxical utopian vision brought Islam together with German Enlightenment culture and Romanticism. Marcus, rather than accept that Enlightenment values had been proved false or that German culture was bankrupt, reevaluated the ideas and contributions of the greatest German thinkers, especially Goethe, to make them relevant and useful for stepping back from the moral abyss and providing for a spiritually and politically sound future. Islam, the religion of eternal self-renewal, belonged both to Germany's past and to its future, according to Marcus. It was the country's only salvation. His envisioned potential future for Germany was not to be. A year after Marcus made these arguments, the Nazis seized power. Marcus was incarcerated in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, not as a Muslim or a gay, but as a Jew in 1938, following the November 9th and 10th pogrom. He was brutalized and held in the barracks newly constructed for the thousands of recently arrested Jewish men. He claimed to have remained there until a delegation led by his imam, Dr. Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, gained his release. Abdullah obtained a visa for Marcus to travel to British India, where a position at Ahmadi World Headquarters awaited him. Just before the outbreak of World War II, using travel documents secured by the imam, and with the assistance of his international network of gay acquaintances, Marcus was able to escape to Basel, Switzerland instead. Now, these facts do not fit our available frames of thinking about Muslims and Jews. Yet these facts alone challenge many deeply ingrained preconceptions about Muslim attitudes towards Jews and even toward gays. Who were these tolerant Muslims who created an intellectual and spiritual home for Marcus and allowed him to rise to be the representative of the community? What was their understanding of Islam and religious conversion that attracted German intellectuals yet offended the Nazis? Why did they risk the standing of their community in Nazi Germany to save Marcus's life? Hugo Marcus and Muhammad Abdullah do not figure in academic and popular narratives of Muslims during World War II. Why is their extraordinary story of Jewish-Muslim interaction practically unknown? What are its implications for the history of Muslims in Europe? The history of the Berlin mosque community and the life of its leading converts shed light on the Muslim response to Nazism and Muslim-Jewish relations. Largely because of the tendentious politics of history and memory produced by the Israeli-Palestinian struggle, we do not yet have a complete answer to the question of how Muslims responded to Nazism and the persecution of Jews. Until recently, few academic and popular responses to this question have focused on Muslims who came from Germany or had resided there for decades. Most look at Muslims in the Middle East or those who were temporarily located in Berlin during World War II. In fact, research on Muslims in Nazi Germany has overwhelmingly focused on Arabs, and for that matter, on a single Palestinian, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Al-Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was the guest of Hitler in Berlin and whose notoriety for working closely with the Nazi regime has overshadowed the activities of all other Muslims in Germany and indeed elsewhere as well. Scholarship on Muslim-Jewish relations has been seen as part of Middle Eastern history, shaped by the conflict in Palestine. Immediately after World War II, supporters of the establishment of a Jewish state began campaigning to delegitimize the competing Palestinian national movement by claiming that al-Husseini's anti-Semitic views and collaboration with the Nazis were representative of the sentiment of all Palestinians and consequently of all Arabs. Referring to the Israeli Holocaust memorial Yad Vashem's Encyclopedia of the Holocaust, a scholar notes, the article on the Mufti is more than twice as long as the articles on Goebbels and Göring, longer than the articles on Himmler and Heydrich combined, longer than the article on Eichmann. Of all the biographical articles, it is exceeded in length, but only slightly, by the entry for Hitler. After recognizing nearly 25,000 people over 50 years, only in 2013 did Yad Vashem accept its first Arab righteous Gentile, Dr. Mohammed Helmi, an Egyptian physician who saved the lives of 4 Jews in Berlin. Recently, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu even claimed the Mufti gave Hitler the idea to annihilate the Jews. Such preconceptions about Arabs and Muslims still prevail even in academic circles today. A recent study uses al-Husseini's actions to implicate all Palestinians, Arabs and Muslims in the perpetuation of the Shoah. The author depicts Arabs as uniformly pro-Nazi and anti-Semitic, citing the fateful collaboration of Arab exiles in Berlin with the Nazis and the alleged widespread acceptance of Nazi ideology in the Middle East then and even now. The appetite for biographies of the Mufti of Jerusalem and conspiracy theories about ties between Nazis and Islamists appears insatiable. Other scholars have rejected such a one-sided depiction, finding that Arab intellectual elites, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, overwhelmingly rejected fascism and Nazism as ideology and practice and condemned the persecution of European Jewry, and that al-Husseini's views were peripheral in Palestine, Egypt, Syria, and North Africa. Moreover, they have presented evidence that Arabs, especially Jewish Arabs, were also victims of the Nazis. Yet by focusing on the Arab Middle East and Arabs in Germany, this scholarship too implicitly takes the Arab experience to represent the Muslim experience more generally. In fact, al-Husseini did not reach Berlin until 1941, 8 years after the Nazi seizure of power. Pro-Nazi Muslim exiles did not take over the Berlin Mosque in leadership of the only recognized Muslim organization in the Third Reich until 1942, 20 years after Muslims had first established Islamic institutions in the city. Few have yet asked how those who built the mosque responded to the Nazis and anti-Semitism. For what has been largely missing from the debate until now is a prehistory of al-Husseini's collaboration, an introduction to the diverse Muslim groups present in the city beginning in the 1920s, a discussion of how their rivalries affected their response to the Nazi takeover, and a narrative of the spectrum of Muslim responses to Nazism in Germany from 1933 until al-Husseini's arrival, including that of German converts to Islam. The Muslim encounter with the Holocaust is not just a Middle Eastern story or one that concerns only Middle Easterners in wartime Europe. It is also not limited to Muslims of the majority Sunni denomination. After World War I, the Muslim population of Berlin included Afghans, Arabs, Persians, Tatars, Turks, South Asians, Germans, and other Europeans, Sunnis, and members of other Islamic confessions, secularists and Islamists, nationalists and socialist revolutionaries. Islam in Germany was first established by non-Arab Muslims, especially South Asians, including those of a minority Islamic confession, the Ahmadi. That they were not Arab, Sunni, or Middle Eastern, not connected to any nation-state's politics of memory, and not in conflict with Israel, are among the many possible reasons for that neglect. South Asia is not the usual focus of research into the relations between Muslims and Jews. None have yet provided a satisfying answer as to whether they were victims, resistors, accommodators, or collaborators during the Nazi era. Also obscured in the debate is the crucial role played by German converts in the establishment of Islam. Just as not all Muslims in Germany were Arabs, neither were they all foreign. And not all German Muslims were former Christians. A question previously unexplored is the fate of German Muslims of Jewish background during the Nazi reign of terror, and how other Muslims responded to their persecution. Answering this final question enables us to explore both Muslims and the Holocaust, and Muslims in the Holocaust. An analysis of Marcus's life addresses these blind spots and adds something new to the literature on Muslims in Germany. From its establishment, the Ahmadi mission in Berlin attracted German avant-garde intellectuals, partly by promoting conversion as a kind of double consciousness, preaching interreligious tolerance, practicing inclusion of gays. Marcus was not the only one at the mosque, and speaking out against racism, nationalism, and war. When German society was Nazified, the Ahmadi, like the other Muslims in Berlin, found themselves needing to make accommodationist overtures to the regime. Yet in helping Marcus to escape from Germany, they managed to thwart the Nazi reign of violence. Their actions in saving the life of their formerly Jewish co-religionist call into question the claim that Muslims shared the Nazis' deep-rooted anti-Semitism. A close examination of Marcus and his mosque community thus moves the debate away from the Sunni Arab al-Husseini, sheds light on the history of the diverse Muslims of pre-war Germany, and contributes to a growing body of literature focusing on the lost stories of European Muslims and Muslims of Europe who saved Jews from Nazi persecution. By acknowledging Marcus's life, we can help change not only how the Muslim encounter with Nazism is depicted, but also how the history of the Muslims in Europe is portrayed, when it begins, who it includes, and whose interpretation of Islam is remembered. To understand Marx's conversion to Islam, one gains little insight from scholarship that views conversion of Jews as an act of radical assimilation and integration. Most Jews who converted to Christianity in modern Europe did so as a strategic or practical move, leaving the fold primarily for non-spiritual reasons, driven by ambition, a search for fame, or a desire for status. They converted to Christianity to overcome social discrimination and cultural stigmatization, as well as legal disabilities and even violence. Rather than become Christian, a road taken by many thousands of German Jews for careerist, romantic, cultural, and nationalist motivations, a complex mix of opportunity and discrimination, Marcus chose to become Muslim. He was secure enough in his Germanness to choose a very newly established minority rather than the majority religion, which other Jews thought offered them the surest path to feeling that they were becoming more German and to full acceptance as a German by others. Marcus was convinced that becoming Muslim he would not have to give up being German, unlike other Jews who became Christian to escape who they were. Marcus maintained membership in the Jewish community of Berlin for over a decade after converting to Islam. His conversion is thus atypical and hardly an act of radical assimilation, for he did not cease to legally identify himself as a Jew or end his formal ties to Judaism and Jews. If Marcus's conversion to Islam was somewhat unusual for German Jews, his understanding of that religion was not. German-speaking Jews identified and were fascinated with Islam. They played a leading role in Islamic studies in 19th century Central Europe, and Jewish Orientalists tend to be more favorably inclined toward Islam than their Christian counterparts, lending their research a more respectful character. Their Orientalism was colored by Jewish sensibilities, namely their desire for Jewish civil equality, their antipathy to Christianity, and their rejection of Orthodox Judaism, as well as their Islamophilia, which saw them tirelessly promote the idea of a genuine Muslim-Jewish symbiosis. Writing against the grain of Orientalist scholarship, which denigrated Judaism and Islam alike, pursuing complete integration in German society, waging their own personal battles against professional exclusion and anti-Semitism. They aimed to reform and de-Orientalize Judaism and de-exoticize Jews. The path to doing so led them to present Islam as a rational and tolerant relative or product of Judaism. They contrasted an idealized image of medieval Muslim tolerance, a golden age of Jewish-Muslim harmony, with eternal Christian intolerance to chastise contemporary Germans. From the early 19th century, German-speaking Jewish scholars and writers such as Abraham Geiger, Heinrich Gretz, Ignaz Goldziher, and Gustav Weil felt deep affinities with Muslims, perceiving Islam as rational, tolerant, and philosophical, the religion that promoted science, reason, and a free spirit of inquiry, and the religion closest to the ideals of pure monotheism first introduced by prophetic Judaism, as it was assembled from the building blocks of Jewish ideas and religious practices, so they asserted. They contrasted Islam, in which they saw a pure essence that was the living embodiment of prophetic Judaism, with contemporary Orthodox Judaism, in their view, an affront to reason. Rather than his well-known Jewish contemporaries who converted to Islam, Marcus would be a better standard for German converts to Islam to follow. Marcus came into contact with Islam in Germany, contact with Muslims in Germany, and he never doubted that one could be German and Muslim, seeing correlations in basic approaches to life, and could live as a German Muslim, never leaving German-speaking Europe. Marcus used the same tropes as earlier Jewish writers: reform, rationalism, science, philosophy, and tolerance to de-exoticize and de-orientalize Islam and Muslims rather than Judaism and Jews. Unlike earlier Jewish scholars, such as Geiger, he neither aimed to redeem Judaism in the eyes of Jews and Christians alike by reforming it, nor was inspired to return to reinvigorate Judaism after investigating Islam. Unlike Muhammad Assad, who sought to leave his previous Central European life behind to begin anew elsewhere as a Muslim, living in Saudi Arabia, dressing as an Arab, speaking Arabic, marrying Arab women, Marcus sought to reveal the convergences in German and Muslim history, culture, philosophy, and values. Marcus rejected a number of paths taken by other Jews like himself. Rather than self-orientalize by making himself into an Arab like Assad, or by migrating to Palestine and having relations with and writing explicit, erotic, Orientalist-soaked verse about Arab youth, like the gay and Orthodox Dutch Jewish poet Jacob Israel de Haan. And rather than seeing himself as a noble Oriental, straddling East and West, like an earlier generation of German-speaking Jews fascinated with Islam, and like his contemporary Assad Bey, Marcus never doubted his ability to remain German and live in Germany after becoming a Muslim. But the Nazis denied him this path. Marcus's life was saved by his taking refuge in Switzerland in 1939. He refused to return to the Federal Republic of Germany after the war, which persecuted gay men by implementing paragraph 175's harsher version introduced by the Nazis. Just as he was known as Hamid to Muslims, Marcus was called Hans Alienos, Latin for Hans the Stranger, by other gay men, a reference to his being a German exile. Writing under that pseudonym, he was a frequent contributor to the international gay journal Der Kreis, the Circle, published in Zurich, the only German-language gay journal which featured articles from members of the pre-war German homosexual rights movement. Everywhere, it was a forbidden magazine, read in secret, passed from hand to hand, the lifeblood of a secret organization that hosted costume balls. It was as an island of continuity from Weimar, Germany. Marcus published fiction, sometimes containing Islamic elements, and non-fiction in the journal from the age of 68 to 85, from 1948 to 1965. Marcus's decades-long association with Hirschfeld and Hiller, his lifelong activism fighting for gay rights, and his non-fiction writing on homosexuality, including a post-World War II essay on Goethe's approach to homosexuality, and a piece he penned at the age of 85 in commemoration of Hirschfeld, point to his support of the Jewish and liberal model of gay identity. That model minoritized gays as members of a biologically determined, distinct subculture with a fixed nature that was homosexually inclined, promoted gender inversion to explain their desire, relied on the sciences and medical research, and emerged from progressive, emancipatory, and liberal politics, seeing homosexuality as a subculture analogous with race and ethnicity, and especially comparable to Jewishness, deserving legal protections. Marcus argued that Goethe anticipated sexologist Hirschfeld's scientific theory of sexual intermediaries. Yet Marcus's homoerotic fiction writing, from a novella he published as a 20-year-old to his last short story published when he was 75, show that he also identified with the competing version of gay identity, the Hellenist and illiberal model. That model, linked with Adolf Brand and Hans Bleuer, and spurred by Nietzsche's illiberal rereading of the Greek tradition, was universalizing, presenting gay desire not as the province of a numerical minority, but of all men, a building block of masculine society, especially in the military and schools, as exemplified by the ancient Greeks. It was an understanding of homosexuality that was cultural rather than biological and masculinist. It objected to medicalization, and it was intertwined with conservative thought. Synthesizing both models, various writers and artists created a gay literary culture with its own understanding of sexuality and gay identity, and focusing on the cultural aspects of same-sex desire. Marcus was one of them, for in his work we find attention to the aesthetic nature of homosexuality that reflects Thomas Mann as much as Goethe. Just as he had modeled his own conversion narrative on the conversion narrative of Goethe, and sought precedent in his own appreciation for Muhammad and Islam in his, Marcus turned to the writing and life of Goethe as personal and literary precedent and legitimizer for his own gay feelings and identity. For just as Goethe's poetry and prose exhibit unmistakable praise for Muhammad and Islam, as well as apparent adoption of Islamic views, compelling German Muslims to consider him to have been a Muslim, so does Goethe's writing offer explicit homoeroticism, admiration of male beauty, and love between male friends, and the theme of pederasty, giving rise to queer readings of the man and his age. This includes his early poetry, such as To the Moon and Ganymede, written around the same period as his Muhammad song, and The Elf King, as well as his prose, including Faust, Italian Journey, Letters from Switzerland, Wilhelm Meister's Journeyman Years, and in West-East Divan, written when he was mature. Goethe had written, in actual fact, Greek pederasty is based on the fact that measured purely aesthetically, the man is, after all, far more beautiful, more excellent, more perfect than the woman. Pederasty is as old as humanity, and therefore it may be said that it is rooted in nature. He also wrote, I like to see young creatures gather around me and befriend me. One unpleasant experience after another failed to bring me back from this inborn drive, which at present, in the event of the most explicit conviction, still threatens to lead me astray. He wrote, what a glorious shape my nude friend has, how duly proportioned all his limbs are, what fullness of form, what splendor of youth, what a gain to have enriched my imagination with this perfect model of manhood. And, but my love is yet more dear when a memory kiss I win. Words go by and disappear, yet your gift remains within. This is the youth cupbearer serving a mature man in West-East Divan. So Marcus is the first and perhaps only writer to maintain that Goethe was Muslim and gay like him. Scholars have found that while Goethe and those like him could not have had a gay identity, which emerged in the late 19th century, they were part of a subculture based on same-sex desire whose signifiers prefigured the identity of the modern homosexual. Among the signifiers were Greek antiquity and culture, particularly the propensity for male-male love, and Ganymede, model for the socially acceptable erotic relationship between a man and a youth, biblical traditions, Orientalism, a region stretching from the Muslim world to Italy, where one found classical civilization and sexuality perpetuated, Switzerland, and the cult of friendship. Friendship between men, Freundesliebe in German, which surpassed a man's love for a woman, was seen as an effusive, passionate, and intimate relationship. If these were signifiers of homosexuality for Goethe, so are they in the fiction of Marcus, where one finds the erotic themes of the beauty of the male nude, the superiority of male-male unrequited desire to male-female consummated love, temptation and awakened yet never consummated desire, the meaning of true friendship, Christian imagery, and ancient Greek mythology. In conclusion, queer Muslims are hardly conceivable in most discourse about Islam and homosexuality in Europe today. How much more is this the case for a Muslim man before gay liberation? Unlike, as is often the case for Muslims in Europe today, however, following the mass migration of Muslims to the continent after World War II, no one could ask Marcus, "Where do you come from?" as he was German. But as with the far right today, the Nazis told him, "You do not belong here," but because he was also Jewish, not because he was Muslim. His answer, "I am from here," was as unacceptable to the Nazis then as it is to Islamophobes in Europe today. A biography of Hugo Marcus helps us to simultaneously queer Jewish and Islamic studies, if not German history. German Jew, Muslim, Gay is the first biography devoted to examining the life of the German born as Hugo Marcus, who became the Muslim Hamid, who the Nazis forced to be renamed Israel, a gay man who never called himself gay, but fought for homosexual rights, who chose to write gay fiction under the pen name Hans Alinus during his decades of Swiss exile. He saw Goethe as his pole star, model German, model gay, and model Muslim, whose life and writing offered a solution to Germany's cultural crisis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baer, for that incredible presentation, full of so much rich information of intellectual history, challenging the historical narrative of treatment of Muslims in Germany. There's so much in there. And for those of you who were intrigued by this presentation, I would strongly suggest that you purchase the book, which is available with a discount. You should have received the link and it will be sent out to you again after this event. We do have a few questions coming in, but I want to start with a few of my own that I think tie into some of the questions that are coming in. In the book, you discuss the significance of converts, of Jewish converts to Islam in Germany, and you really identify two main points of significance. The first, that these converts were not just regular members of the congregation, but became leading Muslims that formulated Islamic thought and practice, and that these diverse creative forces helped forge Islam. And in particular, you find this incredible lecture that Marcus gave at the mosque, where he sort of discusses the Quran using raw material from Jewish, Christian, Zoroastrian, Hindu, and ancient Egyptian sources, and arguing that God has repeated his earlier revelations of different times, revealing in each nation, finding in the Quran something familiar in a world of their own. Do you view this as Marcus's central identification of the melange of ideas that can be found within Islam, or do you think that he's drawn to Islam primarily because it provides sort of a safe haven to live as a homosexual?
It's a fantastic question. Again, Marcus, we have to think about how he saw Islam. He saw Islam also almost in a Protestant way, where an individual can have direct access to the text, doesn't need the intervention of any other scholarship, and can read the Quran, can be inspired by the Prophet Muhammad, and then can diverge and create an Islam almost for himself. As I mentioned in the talk, normally for Sunni Muslims, most Muslims in the world, one of the pillars of faith, in fact, the first one, is the Shahada, the call to faith, that there's no God save God, that Muhammad is his prophet. But Marcus got rid of that pillar of faith and replaced it with his own completely invented pillar, which was purity. And in that, as I mentioned in the talk, in that purity, he included all the things that he was. He was a pacifist. He was different than other people, meaning he was gay, and he cared about aesthetics and beauty. So he saw in Islam an opportunity for himself to create an intellectual and a spiritual world for himself. And this is something that German converts to Islam are even doing in Germany today, where they establish their own mosques and where they seek to interpret the Quran and seek even to expunge Turkish and Arab thinkers and people and create a purely German Islam. Marcus was doing something like that. I won't speak too much, but very briefly, he was creating an Islam that belonged to Germany. And this was in the 1920s. Today in Germany, it's been a debate since the 90s, whether Islam belongs to Germany. Of course it does. But Marcus already began this debate 100 years ago. So that's the brief answer to your very good question.
Okay, we're getting this question in so many different ways that I'm gonna try to approach it in another way. A question that came in: what was Marx's relationship with the larger Muslim community in Germany or globally? Or did he see him sort of situated within this particular sect? or how did his interpretations of Islam fare with the larger Islamic world?
Again, it's a very important question because the Ahmadi sect, in fact, the Ahmadi have divided into two groups. And this is only, I'm not going to go into all the details, but this is one of the Ahmadi groups. They controlled Germany's mosque until they were all expelled. The Ahmadi were citizens of, they were British subjects because they were from South Asia, from British India. But they controlled the mosque in Germany. So if any Muslim in Germany from 1927 to 1941, the period when the Ahmadi controlled it, wanted to pray in a purpose-built mosque with an appropriate prayer niche facing Mecca and with an appropriate, all the appropriate prayers and so on, they had to use the Ahmadi mosque. So other Muslims also used that mosque, even though they disagreed with the Ahmadi interpretation of Islam. Of course, the Ahmadi, that group, is diverges from Islam. I'm not going to go into the details, but so other Muslims were opposed to them from the very beginning of their arrival in Germany. And there was a huge contest between Muslims in Germany to get the attention of the German public, to convert people to Islam, and also to get the attention of German authorities to be recognized as the only legitimate Muslim community in the country. So there was always this competition and always this condemnation from other Muslims. Muslim condemnation of the Ahmadi changed. So in the beginning, it was more along the lines of their connection to the British, and they were called, well, I'm not going to say what they were called, but they were called, they were affiliated with the colonialist, was what they were accused of being. But then when the Nazis took over, then other Muslims began to attack the Ahmadi because of the gay and Jewish, especially Marcus members, especially Marcus, the Jewish member, and there were a couple of gay members. So they changed their tactic to get the attention. Relations then between the Ahmadi and other Muslims were quite strained. And when Sunni Muslims who supported the Nazis were able to take over the mosque in 1941 and 1942, then everything changed. The tenor of the mosque and who prayed there and what they were fighting for, which was for the Nazis. The last tiny little point I'll make is that Marcus personally was a person who provides us perhaps with a lesson we can take from the past, which is don't burn any bridges, be friends with everyone. You never know when they'll save your life. So even though he was gay, and even though he was Jewish, he still maintained communications, writing letters back and forth with Nazi German Muslims at the mosque in the early part of the war as they worked together to complete the German translation of the Quran.
Yeah, it's absolutely a fascinating point. And I actually had a follow-up question to that, which was really your second identification of the significance of the converts. But I wanted to ask, because there were questions that came in about which you responded to here. What did the larger Muslim world think of the Ahmadis accepting, gay converts? And I wanted to sort of push out a little more and say, why do you think, based on your study, that the Ahmadi mosque was willing to be so accepting of the gay converts?
Well, the Ahmadi themselves were a proselytizing, they call themselves missionaries. Their aim, having been the subject of missionaries in British India, was to take their modern version of a reformed Islam back to the metropole. And they first established a mosque and a community in England, and they began to convert people there. And it was after that that they, later in the 1920s, they moved to Germany. So their bigger aim was to spread their vision of a modern, in their terms, modern progressive Islam. And one way to do that was to convert intellectuals. In the English case, to convert aristocrats, and in the German case, to convert intellectuals. And Marcus was an intellectual. He was a philosophy student, he was a writer, he was a journalist, he was a very, very learned man. He published half a dozen philosophical works. So that was part of it. Part of it was, okay, they found someone who will join. They found someone who can edit all their works in German. So that was part of it. But the other part was that that group of Ahmadi at that time and place were tolerant in every way. We're open to people of different, in the language of the day, race, in our terms, religion, in our terms, sexuality. They were completely open to that. And in fact, I haven't talked about it. Other scholars have, but the Ahmadi also wrote an awful lot about women and the role of women in Islam. And they attracted a lot of women followers and eventual converts to the mosque as well.
Interesting. Thank you. I love the way that you really situate this dynamic of conversion, comparison with Jews who are converting to Christianity, and also within the context of the crisis of German Enlightenment, which seems so critically important in order to understand what's really taking place with converts, right? And the tensions between religious identity and philosophical identity that are constantly at interplay here. And you do such an amazing job of sort of parsing out. So it really shows through your work the power of the converts in bringing in these creative ideas and pushing the boundaries of what Islam is during this period. Your second main point about the significance of converts is equally interesting, is looking at how the converts themselves were mixing their own identities. And I was just tremendously struck at the documentation that you had when the time comes for Marcus to apply for reparations, that he has to grapple with his identity through official documents. And I'm wondering if you could speak about that a little bit, because it struck me that this is not just an issue for converts, this was an issue for many Jews who had to sort of in very rigid ways document their Judaism.
That's right. And it took Marcus years to begin to earn reparations from Germany. He did, but he had to explain his conversion to Islam. But for him, it was very simple. In Marcus's own letters, he wrote to the Swiss authorities. Of course, he took refuge and spent the rest of his life in Switzerland. He wrote explicitly, "I've always been a Jew," he wrote. I've always been a Jew. And in fact, the Ahmadi did not expect converts to leave their former religion behind. They had an idea that someone could join Islam and still be a Buddhist or a Christian or a Jew. And Marcus, that was also one of the reasons why I think it was so easy for Marcus. Marcus maintain his membership in Germany to this day. When you are a member of a religious group, you tell the state and you pay taxes to the state, which then gives money to that religious group. So Marcus did not withdraw his membership in the Jewish community until the mid-1930s, when the mosque was basically in danger. The Gestapo made it clear that if this Jewish person was still there in the mosque at social events and speaking and writing in the journal, then they would pretty much shut the mosque down and give it to their people who support the Nazis. So Marcus, in the literature that I found, Marcus explains. He says, "Oh, I had to do it. I had to. It wasn't a choice for me to no longer officially be Jewish. I had to do it to save my brothers and sisters in the mosque community." So. But you're right. So the paperwork and the difficulties Marcus faced in exile, he left Germany with hardly anything. He did manage to take, I think, 2 suitcases full of books at his own writing at the time. But imagine Marcus in 1939. This is just before the Second World War breaks out, and the Ahmadi had wanted to send him by ship to India, which would have been a disaster. Many of those ships didn't make it, and so on. But Marcus takes a train. He travels by train somehow. I don't know how. Travels by train from Berlin to Basel, Switzerland. Now, he must have had nearly a heart attack when he arrived in Basel, Switzerland, because as it is today, Basel has 3 train stations. It has a French one, a Swiss one, and a German one. So Marcus, how many hours he was on that train, he crosses the border to Switzerland, the train stops in the Basler Bahnhof, the German one, and there's Nazi flags flying. But they let him out. They let him out thanks to the travel pass that the Ahmadi secured for him, so that he could leave Nazi Germany. And otherwise, because of his age, because of everything else, he would have been murdered in the camps.
So that raises a really interesting question, and I really would like your opinion in spending so much time with these documents. That Marcus says in his application for reparations, I had to endure everything that Jews in Germany had to endure before I fled to Switzerland. And yet you point out that he is very late. He stays until August of 39 in order to complete the Quran translation, commentary, and introduction. So what are your thoughts on that divergence?
Well, he was in his mid-50s by that point. He was a fairly conservative to right-wing person, and he was a German patriot. He loved his fatherland, and like other German Jews his age, and he even had World War I service, although it wasn't military service. He couldn't understand what was happening to him. Even after the Nazis put him in Sachsenhausen and made him stand at the roll call for 24 hours and put him in those horribly humiliating, horrible conditions. Even at the end of his incarceration, they told him, leave the country now. The next time you are in a camp, you won't live. But when he left the camp, though, he had to surrender all of his financial, all of his everything he owned. He and his mother had to get rid of everything. I'm not sure where they lived exactly. I mean, I almost want to think that they lived with the imam in the house next to the mosque. I can't prove that. I'm not sure where they physically lived, but he and his mother, his elderly, unwell mother, had to surrender all their assets. So in that sense, they lived like other German Jews. He was put in a camp, so that's like other German Jews. What was different is that he was able to escape, and miraculously, and I don't have any explanation for how he did this, he was able to get his mother out of Germany in December 1939. An 80-something-year-old woman, so she was able to, pass away peacefully in Switzerland. So again, don't burn your bridges. He had international gay contacts. He had international Muslim contacts. He had all his writer friends. He also had his journalist friends. So that's how he managed to do it.
It's a really complex story of sort of how he's maneuvering and relying on all these different allies to step in and support him. And I love what you say about sort of not giving anything up in his identity. And that really kind of brings me to a specific question about Marcus, and then a more general question about the interaction between the Ahmadis and the more conservative Muslim community in Germany and the liberal and more Orthodox Jewish communities in Berlin. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the interactions between these groups a little bit more.
So we know that the Ahmadi had good relations with liberal Jews, with what's called in the United States Reform Jews, what's called here in England liberal Jews. So the imam would speak in Reform synagogues in Berlin. So we know they were searching for more Jewish converts. So they had good relations. Again, but with the Orthodox, it's going to be a different story. Whether they're Orthodox Sunni Muslims or Orthodox Jews, it's going to be something else. These are liberal people. So Marcus's family was what we might call an assimilated Jewish family. They were certainly Jewish. He had 3 brothers, but I don't know to what extent they prayed in the synagogue or they kept up Jewish rituals. Marcus was similar to these other gay rights activists. Hilla, again, a Jewish socialist, gay rights activist, and Magnus Hirschfeld. Magnus Hirschfeld famously called himself a world citizen when asked what his identity was. Magnus Hirschfeld famously wrote, may have been the first person to use the word racism in his book on racism, and published, I think, in 1938 after he passed away. So the point is that Marcus was part of these assimilated, liberal, Jewish, intellectual, gay center-right circles, of which there certainly were quite a few. And so those are the same circles that the Ahmadi was connected to. So the Ahmadi like to boast that Hermann Hesse came to their tea evenings, their lecture evenings, and I also mentioned Thomas Mann. Marcus and Thomas Mann were in correspondence during his life. So it's these types of people that made these connections, and these connections then continued for Marcus, in Swiss exile as well, where he reconnected with his Jewish family in Switzerland, and also with gay circles from Germany. And also, of course, his Muslim life was a bit attenuated, though.
Right, right. And you sort of categorize his identity as pacifist, homosexual, intellectual, and spiritual, that it's this incredible sort of combination of these four powerful forces, right? But I think anyone who gets your book, which I hope everyone will, is going to be sort of stunned, I think, by the complexity of the role of the convert. And it's really, I think, an important contribution to think about what is the significance of converts within religions, right? And what is their impact? So I wanted to turn a little bit. There's some questions that are coming in about Goethe and Goethe's ideas, and if you could talk a little bit more about them. There's a question specifically about Goethe's references to Lalat al-Miraj. It was at a celebration that he witnessed. And maybe you could also speak more broadly about Marcus sort of looking to Goethe as an intellectual model.
What's interesting again, Marcus is, let's be honest, he's not that important of a person. He's a marginal person, but his life story allows us to link these three stories together that have never been linked. One is the gay rights struggle. Two is the history of Islam in Germany. And the third one is the story of German Jewry and the Holocaust. So Marcus is a marginal figure. If we follow his life, we can touch all these different things. And the other, I guess the fourth aspect is, what does it mean to be German? One question he's thinking about his entire life. You see it in his diaries, you see it in his letters, you see it in his published and unpublished writings, you see it in even the police records. They ask him, what are you? The question is, who is a German? And for Marcus, it couldn't be any simpler, really. I mean, for us, it's different, but for Marcus, to be German, you are all of these things. The best way to be German is to be a gay man. He was quite misogynist. I haven't talked about that. But to be a gay man, to be Jewish, and to be Muslim. All of these things, rather than taking away from Germanness or being minority German identities, are at the core of German being. Now, not many people would argue that. I mean, there are German Muslims who believe that, yes, being Muslim is the way to be German. But what Marcus, the reason he used Goethe then was because it is absolutely astonishing when you read Goethe from different perspectives. Not the way Goethe is taught to school children in Germany, not the way Goethe is taught in US universities, where one aspect of his writing is thought about. But if you look at Goethe's writings on Islam, it's astonishing that a man in that time period, in that place, wrote such beautiful, positive, spiritual conclusions, came to such conclusions about the religion of Islam. It's unmistakable. So Marcus and other German converts have picked up on this. But what queer scholars have done separately is they've looked at Goethe's characters in his novels, in his poems, in his prose, also his diaries. He wrote prolifically his travels to Italy and Switzerland. Queer studies scholars have looked at that material and said, well, this is astonishing how a man in that time period had such wrote such beautiful things about male beauty and the male body, and was so open about his praise of other men in his stories. So what Marcus does then, again, he's one of the first to do this. This is 1920s. He does these two things that anticipate what German studies scholars have been doing since the 1980s. So that's a reason why I also find Marcus so refreshing, because he will take a poem that all German school children have to recite and memorize, the Elfin King, Erlkönig, and he'll analyze that piece and say, well, what is going on here? What is happening to the boy? What is the man doing? And so on. That people just don't think about that. So Marcus allows us to re-examine Germanness, Islam, and also the history of German Jewry when we look at his life and writing.
That's a fascinating perspective, and really, in a sense, speaks to the power of integrating social history into intellectual history. That you can take someone who's in some ways a marginal figure and show the significance of the connections in their lives. That's really sort of the project of social history, right? I wanted to sort of wrap up by speaking about the German identity in the present. And you allude to this a little bit at the end of your book, that there is a modern Jewish identity that is emerging that encompasses aspects of Judaism and Islam and a queer identity. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that. To what extent sort of would you say that Germany has been able to rediscover this sort of earlier period and the benefits of what was happening in Berlin in the 30s? Is that how you view it, or do you view it as a new sort of modern phenomena? I'll end there.
Well, there's a new mosque initiative in Berlin, and it's led by a Turkish origin German woman who's training to be an imam, and it's called the Goethe Mosque. And it is a mosque where men and women pray together. It's actually held in a church. They don't have their own purpose-built building. They meet in a church, and men and women pray together. They have a gay imam has led the service. As I mentioned, women are being trained to be imams, and they call themselves the first tolerant mosque. Well, it's not true, right? Because actually the Ahmadi Mosque, built in 1927, was the first mosque. Now, this one today, of course, is more open because men and women are praying together. Of course, the Ahmadi kept men and women more segregated than that. But the point is that Germans on their own, Turkish Germans, German converts to Islam on their own, have in the last 10 years come to questioning Orthodox Islam and creating spaces for gay Muslims, women Muslims, liberal Muslims, that are new and exciting. Very, very few people, though. It's a very, very small group of people, and they've been attacked left and right for their efforts for different reasons. So, as a historian, I like to say, well, sometimes people in the past were actually more progressive, more modern, more open than we are. And we look at the Ahmadi Mosque in the 20s, we see something that's very, very surprising, really. Now, if we look at Germany since the 1990s, Berlin, let's look at Berlin since the 1990s. I spent 5 years off and on living there. Berlin became a gay metropolis again, as it hadn't been since the 1920s. Berlin has become a Jewish metropolis again since the 1990s, with the influx of Russian Jews and with a lot of German Jewish converts and other converts. So this is kind of a reemergence of something that we saw in the 1920s, when Berlin first had its first mosque, its first Muslim institutions, was an open city for gays. The first small groups of Muslims were there as well. So in the 90s, Berlin returned, in a sense, to some ways how it had been in the 1920s. And as a historian, I find it quite exciting. Now, I won't comment on today. I live in London now, but of course, politics in Germany are going in a different direction today. And we'll see what happens in the future. But today there is whereas one could argue that in Germany today, gays have become very well accepted. There are government ministers who are gay and mayors of towns and so on. Now we're seeing a backlash against Jews and a backlash against Muslims. This isn't to say there also isn't violence against gays in Germany. That also is occurring. But so we're seeing a backlash. We're seeing, after this open period of the 90s and early 2000s, we're seeing attacks on Jews and attacks on Muslims. That is disheartening. So I would like for people to read this book. I'm hoping for a German translation so that people can then say, well, why not? Why can't someone be Muslim and German, Jewish and German, gay and German, or why not all four at the same time?
Well, thank you for providing such a complex view of the past and providing hopefully a path of collaboration and scholarship for the future. We really appreciate you joining us for this event, and we hope that everyone will get your book and that you get a German translation soon.
Well, thank you for hosting me, and I really appreciate your being able to fit me in at noon your time rather than 6, which would have been midnight my time.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.